We weren't aiming at a particular group.
You don't think you're comfortable with the super rich sheltering their wealth by buying land?
Well, what we tried to do was get the balance right and to protect the family farm.
The Liaison committee had Keir Starmer in a chokehold as they brutally grilled him.
Keir Starmer, or Sir Keith Starling, as he's sometimes known, appeared there yesterday and he was asked this question.
Is there anything that you would do differently if you were starting out now, knowing what you know?
No, we had to do tough stuff. We're getting on with it.
Starmer did all he could to weasel out of the questioning, but ended up embarrassing himself.
If the knives are out for Keir Starmer, and I still think he is so robotic, he can't think on his feet. We were talking earlier, Duncan and I were talking earlier about the fact that there's no kind of optimism, there's no plan, no vision, and that is what is desperately lacking. Who would be likely to take over?
Labour might be looking to get rid of Starmer as they can't afford his blunders anymore.
How are you going to see growth helping households? When do you see in your timeline, what's your vision for when we will see real growth in this country? And why do you think why is the government so confident when the forecasters are much, much less confident?
Well, the forecasts for the OECD, the IMF, Bank of England, OBR are all for growth, so they're all heading in the right direction, but I want them to go further and faster.
Starmer keeps promising growth, but so far everyone, including the OBR, can't see it happening.
23rd of Feb 2023, you said by end of Labour's first term we'll deliver the highest sustained growth in the G7. That critical phrase, by the end of Labour's first term, was not in the plan for change. Is it still the goal to deliver the highest sustained growth in the G7 by the end of this Parliament?
Yes, it is. And
that's obviously not what the forecasters are predicting, but your goal is then to beat those forecasts.
Yeah, the forecasters are predicting on the back of the circumstances as they now are. They're not, as you know, they're not able to take yet into account things that haven't happened.
Starmer's U-turns get called out, and he's not allowed to avoid accountability anymore.
My committee's been talking to hundreds of businesses over the last month. What they say to me really clearly is that the combined impact of the national insurance contribution rise, plus the employment rights bill, plus the national minimum wage, are all going to mean that they are cutting investment, cutting workforce, and cutting wages next year. I mean, in retrospect, was it the world's best idea to put all three of those things together?
Rachel Feves and stupid Starmer have made it impossible to run a business, and everyone's suffering as a result.
Working people have been hit really hard in their pockets over the last few years, one of the worst cost of living crises we've had for a very, very long time. And that therefore we took the decision that we wouldn't hit them in the pay packet. And so there would be no more income tax, national insurance or VAT for working
But we're landing three big changes at the same time. I think that's what's causing the howls of pain.
Yep, so then obviously that leaves you very few places to go for tax rises.
The audacity to say all that while clobbering the working people with inflation and taxes is insane.
And in particular, the changes to agricultural property relief and business property relief announced by the Chancellor in the budget. Prime Minister, who were the targets for these changes? Was it the super rich sheltering wealth? Was it the family farmers, or was it both?
The purpose was to raise revenue in the budget, so it wasn't aimed at a particular group of individuals.
Starmer tried to lie and deflect in front of the committee, and it backfired in the most humiliating way.
When it comes then to super rich people sheltering their wealth by buying land, that's still going to be quite an attractive option, isn't it?
Well, we weren't aiming at a particular group.
You don't think you're comfortable with the super rich sheltering their wealth by buying land?
Well, what we tried to do was get the balance right.
The committee isn't going to accept Starmer's dodgy answers, and he's left sounding like a bumbling idiot.
The changes apply not just to agricultural property relief, they also apply to business property relief, do they not?
Yes.
Now, in practice, the figure that you've given us, 500 estates there, does not include estates where the land would have been passed on using business property relief, does it?
Well, I think that it does. I'll certainly go away.
No, I can assure you that it doesn't.
How pathetic it is for Labour when Starmer doesn't even know their own policies and stats properly.
Today relates to pensioner poverty. 300,000 more pensioners are living in relative poverty since 2013, and women are one of the groups that are disproportionately affected by this. And this has been significantly increased by recent increases in the state pension age. We know that the DWP estimates the restrictions in eligibility for winter fuel payment will also add to the number of disabled pensioners living in poverty.
It's not just the farmers that are furious. One of Starmer's biggest blunders was targeting the vulnerable pensioners. It's a welcome change that the Liaison Committee is holding Starmer accountable, but it's too little too late. People are enraged over this ridiculous government, and some think that the committee wasn't harsh enough.
Now, Keir Starmer is getting a Christmas roasting today as the embattled Prime Minister faces Parliamentary committee chairs for the first time in Parliament as Prime Minister. You can see live pictures there on your screen of Sir Keir Starmer being lightly grilled ahead of Christmas. Now, with storm clouds gathering on multiple fronts, including his betrayal of the waspy women, farmers and pensioners, is the Labour leader having a nightmare before Christmas?
The Liaison Committee was an absolute nightmare for Starmer and Labour. They got humiliated as Starmer struggled to answer their brutal questions, and it became clear that he has no idea about what's been going on in the country. Labour's already in crisis mode, and Starmer just made things worse after this disaster questioning session. Literally every betrayal and horrible policy of his was questioned, and he didn't know how to defend any of it.
It looks like a trial. It has all the hallmarks of a robust cross-examination. Is it? Or is it just more pantomime at Christmas?
Well, he's being judged by a dozen or so of his peers, MPs, senior MPs, who are committee chairs. They're in charge of holding the government to account across the environment, foreign affairs, treasury, and so it goes on. And their duty, they're paid about £15,000 a year, these MPs, on top of their MP salary, to be that person holding the government to account.
It was a trial, and Starmer was being grilled for his crimes against Britain. The MPs that were questioning him did their jobs right, as it was a specially selected group of Parliament members. One thing that became clear during and after the questioning was that Starmer isn't used to being held accountable. He completely shut down, but what's more concerning is that, despite all that humiliation, he's still tone deaf enough to believe he's right.
But more than half the MPs on it are Labour MPs. They won't want to give her too hard a time. You're wrinkling your nose there, Martin. You're unimpressed by... I think it's got a chance here. We could be some quite fruity exchanges. I'm watching when the Foreign Affairs Committee chairman speaks, Dame Emily Thornberry.
Yeah.
She, of course, was not given a job in the government.
From the cabinet?
Indeed, by the Prime Minister. She may have a bit of beef there.
Even though the committee's grilling of Starmer was absolutely brutal, people aren't that satisfied with it. Most of the committee members were from the Labour Party, and so they might have gone easy on Starmer. Still, this shows just how unhappy many Labour members are with Starmer, as most of them disagree with a lot of disgusting policies he has introduced so far.
The economy is broken, he says, and there was, guess what, a £22 billion black hole. You're rolling your eyes, Martin.
Well, I was about to say, because I listened to the first 15 minutes and I just ended up playing bingo. The £22 billion black hole twice. Fix the foundations 3 times. Working people twice. Bingo! Full house. I'm afraid it just feels like a load of performative nonsense.
Starmer is a broken record. He kept repeating the same shameless lies that have been debunked time and time again. At this point, Labour is all excuses and no real work, and it just goes to show how out of touch with reality they are. Well, sadly for Sir Keir, the British public isn't buying these pathetic excuses anymore, and they want actual accountability. Virtually everything Starmer has done so far has been nothing short of a disaster, and he's not going to get away with it.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be pretty bad for the next couple of years, but, you know, that's democracy for you. We made a calculated choice,
right.
and it turns out to have been the wrong one.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
When is it ever the right one? I'd like to know when that happened.
Well, yes. I mean, when was the last time anybody elected the government actually was full of hope?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what it was, actually. It was 2019, when Boris Johnson won.
Everyone who voted for Labour regrets it now. We've had a horrible year, and as long as Starmer's in charge, things are only going to get worse. Labour managed to scam the entire nation into winning the elections, and now they're running around ruining the country like idiots. Starmer and his gang of cronies are hopeless. Is it pure incompetence, or do they actually have some sort of sinister plan going on behind the scenes?
I mean, every week since this Labour government has been in, and they got elected on July the 4th, things have just gone from bad to worse. When you thought they couldn't get any worse, this week we got the waspy women scenario. We got, Keir Starmer basically appearing before a committee asking if he had any regrets. We'll play that to you in a minute. But this morning, the front page of the Times, the Bank of England has sounded a warning that the economy is stagnating following Rachel Reeves' budget after businesses responded by raising prices and cutting jobs. I mean, every business now that you talk to is saying this is a disaster.
Starmer deserves an award for how incompetent he is. Things just keep getting worse, and Starmer is consistently making horrible policy decisions to make sure that every Brit is living a miserable life. So far, Labour has betrayed every single demographic possible, and they've done it shamelessly. During the elections, Starmer promised one thing, and right after he showed his true colours of socialism. Is it any wonder that businesses are shutting down under his ridiculous plans?
Harder to sack people, even if they are incompetent, and you think, well, what actually is there to incentivise people to hire people? It's just getting worse and worse.
There isn't any incentive whatsoever. No. Let's have a sort of. We're going to do a few of these. We're going to take a little meander back through the years or through the months of this Labour government. And this was Keir Starmer singing the praises of Rachel Reeves a few months ago as the first woman Chancellor ever.
It will also be the first budget delivered by a woman ever.
Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves are Starmer's favourites, and just like him, they're an utter disaster for this country as well. Businesses are getting slammed with ludicrous taxes and then stupid workers' rights bills. Really, it'd be one thing if those rights were reasonable, but it's just total rubbish. All the while, Starmer has been virtue signalling about the budget being delivered by a woman. In Starmer's deluded world, our struggling economy is fine as long as the budget is delivered by a woman. This government needs to get their priorities straight.
And she has been nothing but an unmitigated disaster.
If you were to take her as the example, we will never have another female chancellor.
And we definitely shouldn't. If this is the idea of a woman running the country and a woman running the economy, I'm afraid it's the worst advert for women doing that ever.
But it's a sign, I think, of how vapid they are, that actually this was taken as a moment. Not what's the content of the budget, what's going to be the long-term effect. Oh, it's a woman, and it stood there, and all the other girls are going to be happy.
Rachel Reeves is possibly the worst thing that has happened to this nation's economy in the past decade, and that's including COVID and the pandemic. She and Starmer have somehow managed to make the worst possible budget for businesses while claiming that it will bring growth. Either they're delusional or they think that the public is stupid. Either way, the Liaison committee flamed Starmer for his nonsense, and rightfully so. The worst part is that Starmer still thinks that he has done nothing wrong.
Sir Keir Starmer, or Sir Keith Starling, as he's sometimes known, appeared there yesterday, and he was asked this question.
Is there anything that you would do differently if you were starting out now, knowing what you know?
No, we had to do tough stuff. We're getting on with it, and I'm very pleased to be delivering from a position of power rather than going around the division lobbies losing every night. I've had too much of that.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Sir Keir.
Take a moment to remember all the disasters Starmer has caused. Freezing the pensioners, failing to stop immigration, burdening the farmers, lying about tax rises, two-tier justice system, and increasing crime rates. Despite all of that, Starmer has the audacity to say that he doesn't regret any of his decisions. He genuinely is so tone-deaf that, in his little fantasy world, Starmer expects us to thank him for the absolute ruin he has brought.
Delivering what exactly? Delivering zero growth, delivering no possible improvements to people's lives. He keeps talking about we had to make these tough decisions in order to make people better off. We're not better off, right? No. So forget that. His other reasoning is we have to do this to bring the waiting list down in the NHS. Also not happening.
I actually believe him, though, when he says he wouldn't do anything differently.
Yeah.
I don't think he has the imagination to think what else he would do differently.
Starmer seemed very satisfied with himself when he said that he's happy to deliver, but so far, we haven't been delivered anything but misery. Literally everything about the country is worse off under Starmer than it was under the previous government. At this rate, this man will never win another election, and it's over for Labour for a very long time.
That this budget was not going to cause growth, that a lot of the plans that they were putting forward were unnecessary and in fact were actively damaging. Lo and behold, things are not going particularly well. But I'm not surprised at all that he would sit there and go, I wouldn't do anything differently. Of course he wouldn't. He is the arch proceduralist.
Do you think he's one of those people that also can't admit that he got something wrong?
Possibly.
Because
also,
he was asked this by Harry Cole the other day.
Yeah.
You know, have you made mistakes? And he sort of glossed over the question, didn't address it at all.
We all expected Labour to be bad, but nobody thought things would be this bad. During the elections, the Tories were an absolute mess, so a lot of people decided to trust Labour. Even after Starmer's initial blunders, people gave him the benefit of the doubt, but now things are getting ridiculous. Everyone's furious at this idiotic government, and for good reason. Too bad for Starmer that even Labour is trying to get rid of him, since this man cannot admit when he's wrong for the life of him.
A very, very sort of, autocratic, very sensible man. Nothing will happen. There will be no scandal. There will be absolutely no brooking of the rules. There will be absolutely nothing other than complete and utter service to the country. And it's been nothing but the opposite of that. As soon as he got in, we found out that he was in receipt of getting free clothes from Nord Alley, free spectacles, clothes for his wife, clothes for, Angela Rayner, clothes for Rachel Reeves, clothes for Sue Gray's son, and money for all sorts of MPs, freebie holidays to America.
The only reason Starmer and Labour won the elections was because Tories were in shambles. We trusted Starmer to be a man of his words, but that all turned out to be a huge mistake. He claimed to have integrity, and all that talk about transparency and accountability were nothing more than lies to win support. Now, the truth has been exposed, and Starmer and his cronies are involved in more scandals than any of us could have predicted. Naturally, everyone hates Starmer now.
Keir Starmer is more unpopular after 5 months in Downing Street than any other Prime Minister since the late 1970s. This was done earlier in the week. 61% of voters were dissatisfied with Keir Starmer's performance. Now, you are, in a former life, previously, I don't know whether you still are, a Labour man. Are you disappointed?
Well, it's been a very inauspicious start, hasn't it, with the winter fuel payments row, the farmers being unhappy.
It's the height of shame and disgrace for Starmer and his cronies that literally everyone is done with this stupid government. Even long-time Labour supporters are incredibly disappointed, and it just goes to show how big of a failure this government has been. Not even 5 months in, and they've made enemies out of every single demographic that trusted them. It's as if Labour is trying to punish those who voted for them, and at this rate, Labour won't ever win another election.
No, I mean, but also, Vincent, he's stolen the money off the pensioners, the inheritance tax on the farms, all of this, just the waspy women. They campaigned with the waspy women. Rachel Reeves campaigned with the waspy women, and then they turned their backs on them. I mean, what sort of message is that sending out?
It's difficult. The waspy women you rightly highlight over pensions was a very difficult area because many Labour MPs were photographed supporting them. Although I think Keir Starmer never quite actually came out and said he would find the money for them. But that's been lost in all of this. And yes, you're right. It's been a terrible, terrible start.
Starmer has no backbone at all. This man is a huge hypocrite who doesn't have a shred of integrity. All those promises that he made turned out to be nothing more than scams. Every other week we see another scandal or protest exposing this government for the incompetent and useless frauds that they are. They're robbing the working class and freezing the vulnerable pensioners, all while Starmer throws away our taxpayer money on useless climate projects and other socialist nonsense that his government keeps shoving down our throats.
And of course, who was the last Prime Minister that was this unpopular? And that was Margaret Thatcher. Yeah. Turned out too badly for her.
Well, that's true, but the difference is that Margaret Thatcher had a vision for this country. Keir Starmer does not have a vision.
Well, I think the challenge is there's only two things that will decide his and Labour's fate. Can Labour turn the economy around, looking very hard at the moment, and can they solve what seems a huge problem by most people with migration, both illegal and legal migration?
Many hardcore and somewhat deluded Labour supporters are trying to cope and downplay the backlash by comparing Starmer to Margaret Thatcher, but even that's wrong. Starmer doesn't even compare to Thatcher, as at least she knew what she was doing. There's a difference between bad policies and clueless incompetence. Starmer has no idea what he's doing, and it's getting painfully obvious as time goes on. Even still, Starmer and Labour have one last chance to redeem themselves by undoing the mess they have created with the economy and immigration. Of course, nobody expects Starmer to be able to tackle those problems.
Keir Starmer says, and this again was earlier in the week, he has no regrets about the decisions he's made in the past 6 months. I mentioned winter fuel, I mentioned the farmers, the inheritance tax there. You've also got the VAT on private schools halfway through the year, which I think is pretty abhorrent. And then, of course, inflation, because Rachel Reeves has spent all this cash. Inflation has gone up to 2.6%, which is going to hit people in the pocket because of their mortgages. Why wouldn't you regret some of that?
Starmer doesn't regret anything because he lives in a fantasy land. He and Labour actually think that they've done nothing wrong, and that's exactly why there's a furious backlash coming for them. People are done with this disastrous government, and for good reason. Just look at the state of the economy and how Rachel Reeves is making it even worse. Inflation is through the roof, and the cost of living is getting unaffordable for many of us. As a result, Labour is in crisis mode, but no amount of damage control will save them from the huge trouble that they're in.
So if the economy starts to lift next year, let's see what winter sales are like. People going out and consuming and buying a lot of Christmas presents, who knows? But without the economy lifting and without some change on immigration, I think Labour will be in real trouble next year.
You mentioned a glimmer of hope there. Yes, people are disposing of assets because they're so worried the government's going to come after them. As I said, inflation has gone up. Rachel Reeves borrowing all this money as well. We're in a period of stagflation. That is what people are worried about.
Stagnation and inflation is the perfect way to describe the state of our economy. People are scared, and many small businesses have shut down as a direct result of this. Make no mistake, Starmer and Rachel Reeves are to blame for this increase in inflation as well. They fiddled with the rules to allow more borrowing and handed out inflation-busting pay rises to their union paymasters. Starmer's in the pockets of the liberal elites, so it's no wonder that it's the working-class Brits that he's sacrificing in order to appease them. The mask is off, and Starmer's disgusting actions are ruining this nation. Even Labour is trying to throw him out, but it's a little too late.
And if the knives are out for Keir Starmer, and I still think he is so robotic, he can't think on his feet. We were talking earlier, Duncan and I were talking earlier about the fact that there's no kind of optimism, there's no plan, no vision, and that is what is desperately lacking.
Starmer has single-handedly managed to make sure that Labour is never trusted by the public again for a very long time. In fact, many Labour ministers are seething at the blunders that Starmer and his cronies have made, and there's an internal rebellion within the party. The Liaison committee made Starmer look like an absolute idiot by holding him accountable, and it's time that we do the same. Starmer must take responsibility for his actions, and that's something you can help with by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.